Welcome to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. Well known throughout the customer leadership industry, Chad has been the chief community leader for Execs in the Know, one of the top executive customer advocacy groups on the planet. With a passion for customer success and a desire to share and develop best practices, Chad's conversations with industry leaders aim to give unfiltered, unplugged access to industry peers who are customer obsessed, just like you. If you enjoy the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Now here's your host, Chad McDaniel.
Welcome to another edition of Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. Absolute pleasure again to have everyone involved. It's been quite a week since last week I had launched the Women in CX Leadership podcast series with 4 different episodes. If you didn't get a chance to listen to those episodes, it was, I think, just an incredible information share with the 4 female leaders that really advocated some of the insights and perspectives in the CX industry. Again, you can find Customer Driven podcast on many of the distribution channels out there: Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcast, Lipson. Encourage you to rate and also subscribe. I mean, every week I'm committed to bringing some of the best, what I think, insights and content that we can get out there for our listeners. If you're not familiar with Execs in the Know, I just want to give a quick refresher. We are a very large customer community group, insights group, that are sharing direct insights and best practices, everything around the whole customer spectrum. Many, many ways for you to get involved with our leadership community. You can go execsintheknow.com. Go to our resources tab, and you can find all sorts of information about us and our community and our gatherings. But enough of that. Tom Lewis, what a pleasure to have you. How are you? I want to make sure I got you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Chad.
Well, Tom, we had, it was fun. We went up to the Bay Area. This was a couple of weeks ago. We were fortunate enough to have Microsoft host us. There was a group of 4 panelists, which you were one of them. And we did kind of a detailed briefing insight around intelligent automation, everything around the continued transformation of the digital aspects and how that's kind of working, not working, where brands are kind of looking at some of that transformation from the traditional channels of voice to what they can automate, what's working and not working. And I've got some great questions I want to throw your way, Tom, because you're such an insightful leader. But before I go there, I think it would be good for our audience to understand from you a quick introduction, a little bit about the company itself, and just to kind of put this conversation into perspective. So please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chad. And also, that event was fantastic. I think the audience kept asking questions and kept us on stage for a little while, so that was good. But as I am the CEO of Smart Action, which is a conversational AI, digital, and voice self-service platform. So think of it this way: as super sophisticated voice self-service, IVR, and chat. And I came to this company 5 years ago, and I took a little bit of a leap of faith, because at that time, I was a partner at Deloitte Consulting, and I ran Deloitte's customer service advisory practice. So the role I played very often was saddling up next to the directors and executives running customer service organizations and helping them with all aspects of people, process, and technology. This company was unknown to me. Smart Action was unknown to me at the time. And when the board came looking for a new CEO, I put it through its paces, very similar to the way I would have for technology that I was evaluating for my clients. And I found it to be extremely innovative, and the word Deloitte often used was disruptive. And I feel like the disruption of AI and conversational platforms and so forth is something that we think is commonplace today. But this company was pretty advanced in that when I was showing up in 2013, already had all that in place. And now I'd say, if anything, the only miscalculation I made was thinking that we were going to be talking about the things you and I are talking about today with much more abandon back then, but at least we are now. And the good news is that that's given this company a tremendous opportunity to get a lot of experience under its belt around what works and what doesn't, and sort of the evolving human condition or human behavior. And the last thing I'll say is that our focus, while a technology company, and really focused on creating conversations with customers to allow them to self-serve or to inquire or what have you, but it's really predicated on this notion of exceptional customer experience or human experience, or this idea of making life less hard, both for the executive in the call center in terms of putting technology in, but also for their customers and their ability to get what they need to get done quickly and easily.
So, Tom, real quick for our listeners, give me, just to put it in perspective, I'm listening to this, give me an example of what your company does, and then we're going to move right into the question sets, so it's crystal clear to our listeners.
Great. Use case, simple use case is for many of the AAAs in the U.S. when people call in for roadside assistance. Our system not only figures out who they are as a member, what their specific needs are, but in many cases actually enters in the dispatch, potentially follows up with them, and also makes sure that the roadside assistance, tow truck driver, et cetera, shows up as expected. And so and it's all of what I just described is done via voice. So somebody's calling in from the road and going through, who they are, what vehicle, their member number. I ran out of gas, or I need a flat tire replaced, or what have you. And that would be an example. Although our business is really cross-industry. We have customers in basically every single industry that has call centers, and that's a lot of them.
Okay, and again, folks, if you want to, you can find Tom smartaction.com. One word, easy to find. So, Tom, let's dive in. So, first of all, the purpose of today's episode is a CEO's perspective towards customer support and automation. I think the group of brands that were in the room a couple of weeks ago in Seattle, and myself, we kind of put you and the other panelists at task for a number. I mean, it was a full day conversation. I'm going to start with today's episode to kind of say, as you reflect back on those conversations, what sort of stood out? What do you felt the pressing needs or conversation sets were? Again, from your perspective, we covered a lot of different areas, but if you had to kind of quickly summarize, what sort of stuck out to you about some of those conversations and pain points and needs and areas of discussion?
So I think a couple things maybe. One was that people are still starving for use cases in the digital landscape that are really moving the needle. And by that I mean you've got a chatbot that really does credibly improve customer experience as well as get the task done. And there were some stories about that, but also a lot of stories in terms of, well, yeah, but I'm still getting a lot of calls and I'm going to be for a while. And that led us to this sort of second point, which is instead of just looking for, if you're having this conversation around AI and saying, how can AI help me? It's probably more practical to ask the question, what's the problem I'm specifically trying to solve? And then can AI solve that problem, as opposed to, I got a screwdriver, where can I stick it kind of thing. And so that manifested itself in a lot of different ways in the discussion. And it means that people are still trying to figure things out. Where should my priorities be? And gratefully, a lot of the solutions that were on stage with me from a panel perspective are ones that you can, and the recommendation was, I think, widely adopted, is, start somewhere, start small, and because this market is evolving, and your learning and your perspective will evolve as well. And so, a little bit of ability to actually leverage the caution of not getting too far ahead of your skis in terms of your investment in any one technology. So a few things I think that we talked about.
Yeah, I know, and it's hard to narrow it down to, because it's a entire day conversation. But I do appreciate that. That particular briefing series, what we called intelligent automation for the service leader. We ran that briefing series for the year of 2018, I think, in 5 or 6 different select cities during that period of time. Really, for me personally, I had firsthand kind of hearing from the brand's perspectives where they were at, what they were struggling with, what they were thinking. And some of the key takeaways from the corporate voice I heard through that 5 6 city tour, whatever it was. I think it was 5. But when it comes to AI and machine learning, start small but start now.
Right.
Now, I'm not an advocate of just go chase the shiny object. And I'm not saying that AI potential is necessarily the right thing for you and your brand. I mean, first of all, know your customer, know their preferences of engagement and support. But I also think we as service leaders cannot be foolish with the transformation that has taken foothold and is going to continue. I think we need to get educated, regardless of where we stand on the spectrum. We have to start embracing. We have the ways to do it in very small pilot controlled ways, but to see how we can take some of the redundant repetitive things that are taking place within the support operation and put them into some automation. So before I move in on that, but Tom, any reflection or thought or question on that or disagreement?
Yeah, no, I think this is all what's sort of fluttering around people's brains. And as new technology comes out, there's new opportunities. And so starting somewhere is good. On the other hand, there's maybe 2 thoughts around it. Number one is that as you invest in things today, typically when you buy technology, you end up at some point having some sort of end of life of that technology and have to go through this cycle again. And so one of the things that we have done is we've developed our solution as a service. And as a service, that means that as we have replaced our speech recognition engine, if we've replaced core components of our solution, as we've upgraded the voice so it frankly sounds better than Siri or Alexa or what have you, those things are part of the services that our clients get, and so they don't have to think about those things, and there's no end of life there. The other piece, though, and along that services realm, is trying to figure out if you should buy versus build. And in my consulting days, the simple sort of thought pattern that I would suggest people listen to is ask yourself 3 questions. And number one is the technology you're talking about something that you have a core expertise in? So I had a retailer at one point that wanted to build a call center. I said, are you call center experts? No. Focus on resale, talk about focus on your product, etc. Number 2 is, does doing it yourself create differentiation in the marketplace that alone creates the reason to do it? And number 3 is, can you do it cheaper? And a lot of the technology we're talking about here, it still makes sense that outsourcing it to an expert makes sense. If you can say no to all those questions, then great, go do it yourself. And so these are the buy versus build decisions that I think call center leaders are going through. And that is that everything we're doing is touching the customer, which means everyone in your organization has an opinion on how to do this, all the way down to the janitor sometimes, I think. And so there's all this whole, not only buy versus build, the priorities of what you invest in, and everybody else's opinion around it. And so it creates some interesting dynamics, not just in self-service, but it could be lots of things from the call center perspective.
So, Tom, let's say, okay, I get it, Chad. I'm all on board with this. All makes sense to what you've said to date. But let's talk about some of the actual obtainments. Big area is always about how reducing cost and ROI measurement. And again, just from your experiences and the clients, I guess you guys have worked with or other things, but with where there's been the deployment of chatbots or virtual assistants or anything, not just chatbots, but let's call it automation opportunities, where have they delivered the most OpEx savings for an organization? Can you give Tom any examples, a quick case study? And so I'm listening to this podcast right now. I like to put it into a quick framework.
Yeah. So there are three things that we consider when we're having a discussion around the overall ROI for our clients. Number one is it needs to have an economic ROI. Number two is, from a table stakes perspective, it has to be the same as or better from a customer experience. And then if you're trying to build the business case internally, it's what I refer to as the what else. So the what else. So let me start with the ROI piece. In automation perspective, the ROI can be as simple as, people are calling in to, check their status on something, schedule an appointment, whatever, and the labor arbitrage, if you will, that automation can do that cheaper than a human, makes a pretty simple ROI formula, i.e., if I can use the machine, I can get my balance, and I can hang up, and the customer's happy, and I spent less time than I would have otherwise, and I'm not using human labor on the call center, the ROI works out pretty well. Now the question is, how often are you 100% successful with those calls? And that influences and degrades the ROI, because if people call for their balance and they can only do that 10% of the time, then that's a problem. And so you really have to interrogate how successful it's going to be and what the rescue methods are and so forth, so that it really hits a high ROI. Now, sometimes there's what I would call repetitive, boring tasks that call center agents have to do, like authenticate the caller. And in some organizations, let's say a health plan, that could be HIPAA authentication, requiring multiple pieces of data and taking a decent amount of time. And so if you could reduce every single call by somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes that authentication process takes, even if no automation occurred after that, you're still creating a positive ROI. And then the customer experience piece, you need to run surveys, and I'll just get to that quickly. Again, it should be positive in terms of the customer experience. And the last thing is, very often, people are trying to get automation or other projects in their call center approved, but call center IVR projects or chatbot projects, these often fall below the line of the enterprise objectives, because they don't understand what's going on in the call center. They're, back to my retail example, they're building stores or doing designs of clothing, what have you. And so how do you align the objectives of the enterprise to map to the objectives of this project? And if one of them, say, is to reduce risk, then pulling phones out of people's hands that are using touch-tone phones while they're driving, for example, truck drivers in a trucking company, would be an example of reducing that risk. So there's ROI, there's customer experience, and there's the what else piece that all has to make sense to build the business case to make it make sense. Sorry for the long-winded answer there, Chad.
No, I'm glad this is being recorded, because I think there was some very good perspective and examples for the audience there, and we'll try to get as much as this we can in the show notes. And by the way, you're listening to Tom Lewis, the CEO of Smart Action. Again, you can find out more about Smart Action at smartaction.com. Based on the limited time we have, though, Tom, I do want, this was a big area of pain or thought and discussion, and it was around data, data cleanliness, trusting the data, data governance, data ownership, security. And I don't even know where to start with the question, other than if we take it at a very high level, when it comes to what I hear a lot about, the data dilemma or the challenges with the clean data to get the outcomes people are looking to do with this. Give me some ideas and thoughts here for our listeners. Again, data is a very large topic, but give me some ideas of what you've seen and how people have approached it or helped in it, or are we just overemphasizing maybe it is not as challenging as we think it is?
Yeah, no, and it was an engaging discussion at the conference, because people came at this topic in a lot of different directions. It was not only the data cleansiness, but data security pieces, et cetera. And so data and the custodian of the data and so forth was a big piece. And it, when we are having a discussion with clients and prospects around data and where we can get it, there's two things that come to play. Number one is we very quickly every time almost come to this observation that the the data is pretty good, but it's not perfect. And so the client very often says, well, yeah, we've got it in these 3 different databases, or, we had this merger that occurred, so half the data is good, but the other half's missing a whole bunch of fields. In fact, address is the example at the conference with, the address field has a bunch of A's in it or something. And so that's very challenging because, garbage in, garbage out from an automation perspective. And so if I am greeting a caller and then using that data to create this personalized experience, and really you're trying to create something that's unique and that differentiates that experience, and yet the data is bad, that's a challenge. The other piece is, with the number of data breaches that occur on, frankly, a regular basis, data security is another big piece of it. And the last thing I think our clients want is another place where their data resides. And so we frankly don't store any of our customers' data. We just simply access it. And even in our recordings and our transcriptions and so forth, we redact all the PII so that eliminates that particular thing. But then you end up with, some knee-jerk reactions that have occurred with some of these breaches. I remember one health plan early on had a major breach, and then when you as a consumer were trying to call them, it took you 8 minutes to get through their whole IVR because the number of recordings and things that they put in place to try to compensate for it, and it causes a lot of grief. So this conversation has been around for a very long time. My suspicion is it will be quite a while before we all look and say, yeah, most people's data is pretty darn clean. On the other hand, the more that you can get your customer to keep their own data clean and make sure that you're making it easy for them to update and communicate and so forth, then they become stewards of it. But not every organization has that kind of intimacy with their customer where that makes sense.
And this goes back to one of the key takeaways I heard from the corporate voice across, the 5 cities we did this in 2018 was, it kind of resonates to what you're saying a little bit, Tom, but, you will fail plenty of times as this is new to everyone, but that's okay as long as you, I would say, learn fast and learn forward. And again, I think that my advocacy to all of the customer leaders out there, you're already doing some great things in small tests and measurements. Keep that spirit, keep sharing. We want to learn from you. If you're not doing or considering it, absolutely, you need to be doing it. And we could have a whole conversation about why and predictions and other things that we're seeing across the execs and the community. Tom, I'm going to last question, and then I got a couple of last questions here, but real quickly about the future. And I just want to throw something in here about what emerging technologies will change how AI is used to interact with customers and prospects. And I remember you saying something in Seattle. It's not just the tools, it's the skills and application of them with the CX focus that is important. I believe you said something like that, but maybe you could put a little more flavor to it.
Well, I think one of the things that I've said, and I got to figure out a better way to package it, but the problem with a lot of this technology is actually on the human side, right? And so the best human to machine interface very often is voice, if only the machine would understand. And so this whole notion of comprehension and understanding and the evolution of that as part of what's happening in the future is going to be, both on the voice side and the digital side, a big piece of this. Some of the complaints around the digital chat, I'm talking about chatbots when I say digital, is, they were fine on FAQs, but they really didn't parse the language properly. And so parsing and really being able to parse the languages, and not, I was going to say English language, but frankly, it being multinational company, we've got the same problem across multiple languages. That whole evolution is what we're going to see. Now, I have this interesting story that I often tell, and that is that if in 2007, let's say, I was to show you a picture on my smartphone, you might look at the picture, but you might be as puzzled or inquiring about the actual phone, because the phone was new and sort of exciting and so forth. But now if I show you the picture on my phone, you're looking straight at the picture, and the technology is invisible. And so the journey that we're on is getting to the point where everything we've just talked about for the last 20 minutes is creating it so that the technology is invisible. And that's the journey that we're on. And so when we talk about being a customer experience brand and focused on that, that's why, in spite of the fact we have incredible, unique intellectual property and a great solution, it sort of doesn't matter. It's what is the experience, and then does that technology become invisible so that the customer has this great effortless experience.
Tom, last one real quick based on the time, and then a quick summary for our guest. Tom, the question is, you're on the forefront of all of this right now. What advice, what hope, what support, give me something positive to leave this episode on. Where do I start? Should I start? Or, what would you want to leave the audience with here about what we've discussed in summary?
Yeah, and lowering your risk while still creating a roadmap to the future is a big part of the way we think about embracing our initial customer and prospect conversations. And so our typical entry-level discussion is that for the cost of roughly 2 agents, you can have our service for a year, and no one's going to lose their job over the cost of 2 agents. And what ends up happening is that our customer retention is super, super strong. And so that low threshold of not having to have this monolithic implementation and lots of professional services. In fact, sort of ironic. I spent my entire career, 25 years in consulting, and we've designed an enterprise that really doesn't focus on the professional services piece of it, but the technology is so tight that we're able to deploy in such a short period of time. That's how we're able to have a full-baked solution with, like I said, roughly the cost of 2 agents. And so that it reinforces one of the things we said at the top of this discussion, which is get started and start to have some discussions. And they don't have to be these, sort of like I said earlier, monolithic major implementations. You can start small and grow. In fact, we refer to it as our relationship with our clients is a journey, not a destination. It's not the implementation of the software, but rather the ongoing evolution of that conversation and back to that no end of life.
Again, Tom Lewis from Smart Action. Today's episode, a CEO's perspective with customer support and automation. Tom, thank you for being such a great guest and getting some of your time. I greatly appreciate that. For our listeners, if you already haven't, please, we're on iTunes, Apple Podcast and many distribution channels. Subscribe to it. Every Thursday, I'm releasing more and more content for our user community. Also, the last thing I will say to our listeners, you're not in this journey alone. There are so many brands that are wanting to connect and share insights, best practices, and ideas around the overall customer success equation. So on behalf of myself, Chad McDaniel, thank you for your listenership and another episode of Customer Driven. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for listening to Customer Driven with Chad McDaniel. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. It really makes a difference in helping others find the podcast. For more information on our customer experience community, please visit execsintheknow.com.